Hey pagans, Fiowin here. I thought that today we would talk about how I became a witch. Okay, so I started out in Christianity. I grew up Christian. I went to church every Sunday. My parents made me. It wasn't like, oh my God, they made me. It was more like it was something that we were expected to do, and I went happily type of thing for the most part. Anyway, I grew up in the Episcopal Church. Robin Williams used to joke that Episcopal is Catholic light, all the tradition with none of the guilt, because Episcopalians don't do confession. So, yeah, I was Episcopalian. After my husband and I got married, we became friends with a couple that were pagan, and I didn't have a problem with them. I mean, we were friends with them. We went on double dates, all sorts of stuff, but we didn't really talk about religion or spirituality. I knew what they were, and I didn't judge them for it, but at the same time, I was just like, you know, okay, so we're different. We're just not gonna like talk about it. Well, so one weekend we went to go visit them because they had recently moved into a new place, and we went to go see it. And they had set up their bookshelf, you know, in a corner or whatever, and on one of the shelves of their bookshelf, they had, you know, all their witchy stuff. And one of them, one of the witchy things was a cauldron, you know, like, you know, one of the little ones, like a little baby one or whatever. And I kind of got up the courage to ask about it. So I finally like looked at one of them and I was just like, okay, please don't take this offensively because I'm like genuinely curious, but can you tell me what you do with a cauldron? Because I know both of you well enough to know that you're both, you know, good people and you don't like, you know, double toil and trouble. You know, you're not like that kind of witch, so I don't understand. Like, can you just explain to me how this works? And they weren't offended by it, and they were just like, yeah, sure. So they took the cauldron down and they were like, okay, look, this is made of cast iron. It's a fire-safe vessel, so you can burn things in it. And I'm like, okay, you know. The husband tells me that he said, okay, so let's just say we might do spells in it. And I was like, can you give me an example? Because I have no idea what you mean when you say spell. So he explains it. He's like, okay, look, a spell is, or magic is anything that you do that focuses your intention to help you bring about your will. Like, okay, that's really vague. I don't get it. Can you give me an example? So he tells me, all right, so we may take like a little scrap of paper because we have a petition that we want to send to a deity. Okay? And he's like a prayer. Got it. Okay, like a prayer. You know. Said, so we'd write our petition on a piece of paper. You may use a special ink if you want to. You may just write it down. Depends on the person, depends on the witch. And then you might fold it up, light it on fire, and drop it in the cauldron. Fire-safe vessel, right? The paper can safely burn up without burning the house down. This is a good thing. I'm like, okay. And he said, and then, you know, you visualize or you imagine that as the paper burns up and the smoke from the paper burning goes up into the air, you are visualizing that your petition is going to your deity. And I just kind of, I'm speechless. I'm dumbfounded. Because we did this at church camp. I did that. So I went to church camp one year, and this wasn't summer camp, this was like a retreat or something. So we went to a church camp retreat, and it was a weekend retreat, And one of the things we did was we sat down and we wrote out our goals, who we want to be in the next 5 years. So 5 years from now, who we want to be. And we wrote ourselves basically a letter saying, like, I want to be this or whatever. And the theme of the weekend was give it to God, right? So we write all this down, we kind of like, you know, like read through it after we're done, and we really meditate on it. And then we fold it up and we put it in an envelope, and they built this huge bonfire out in the middle of this field, and we all gathered around it and we all threw in our envelopes at the same time, and we imagined, and the camp counselors were like, even like they, you know, said to do this. They were like, so imagine that as your goals and your letter to yourself in the future, to your future self, as it's burning up, imagine that those hopes and those dreams and those goals are going up to God. You are giving it to God. Same fucking thing. So I looked at him and I told him this, and I was like, so you're telling me that I've been practicing magic at a church camp since I was like in 7th grade? And he just deadpan looked back at me and was like, yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So I go home and I'm talking to my husband about this. My husband, by the way, is not religious and only slightly spiritual. And I'm like freaking out in my head, right? I'm like, oh my God, this is nothing like I imagined it. And I've been doing this all my life. And all of my experiences at church camp were the most spiritual experiences that I've ever had, and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, so I talk to them more. And I'm talking about what it means to be pagan, what it means to be a witch, what it means to be Wiccan, what it means to be all these things. And he actually, the husband actually suggested a book to me. He said, you know, there is such thing as a Christian witch. And I was like, what? He said, yeah. He said, actually, I found a couple of books that a friend of mine who's a Christian witch has read, and I can send you the names of them. Yeah. Sure. So he sends me The Path of a Christian Witch by Adelina St. Clair. And I think I found Christopaganism, which is another book. And The Path of a Christian Witch just inspired me. I mean, her story inspired me to keep going, right? And then I started reading Christopaganism, and it talks about Christianity and paganism separately, and then it talks about them together. Well, there's a part of this book that talks about the beginnings of Christianity, the Jesus movement, and all this stuff. And I remember I was on night shift. I was working 12-hour shifts, and I was on night shift. I was working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was working, like, you know, one of the duty posts that was, like, dead most of the night, you know. And I was reading this part of this book that talks about the Jesus movement and all this stuff, and I just started, like, out of nowhere, I just started tearing up and crying and, like, bawling my eyes out, because all at once I realized that everything that I believed to be true about Christianity wasn't. And you couldn't prove it with history. And the historical facts were different than the mythology, basically. And that was my tower moment. I mean, everything came crashing down. And since then, I have been trying to build everything back up. That was back in 2011. Between 2011 and 2012, I did my year and a day study. In July of 2012, I did a self-initiation and officially became a witch, pagan, whatever you want to call it. And since then, I have been practicing my craft here, there, whenever I have time, that kind of thing. course, I've recently started getting back into it, which is why I'm doing videos again. And yeah, I feel like I've made a really big step by finding a goddess to venerate, because it's been really, really tough to get out of the patriarchy of Christianity and be comfortable talking to and venerating a goddess. So this is something that I feel like I'm on the edge of a breakthrough, and either I have just broken through or I'm just about to. It's like right there. Yeah, that's my story.